Hello everybody, and welcome to Theology 101. Today we are going to look at the book of Habakkuk. The book of Habakkuk is the 35th book of the Old Testament. The Hebrew Bible has 3 sections: the Law, Prophets, and Writings. The Law contains the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The Prophets is made up of 8 books divided into the former prophets and the latter prophets. The latter prophets include Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. The writings consist of religious poetry and wisdom literature, and Habakkuk is part of the 12 minor prophets sections of the Old Testament. Now, when I say a book is considered a minor prophet, I am not referring to its importance, but to its length. In other words, the 12 books called the minor prophets are shorter than the major prophets. Let me go over the historical backdrop. If you recall, Micah prophesied during the reigns of several kings. King Hezekiah, who was a righteous king, listened to Micah and did not make a military treaty with Egypt to defend themselves against Assyria. So in 701 BC, when the ruler of Assyria was standing at the gates of Jerusalem, God protected Jerusalem by killing 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. But then everything changed with Hezekiah's son, Manasseh, who became king of Judah at 12 years old. He reintroduced idolatry and human sacrifice and was known as one of the worst kings of Judah. Manasseh was so evil that he even offered his own son as a burnt sacrifice to the Ammonite god Molech. Later, when Manasseh was over 60 years old, he was taken to Babylon by the king of Assyria and was humbled, repented, and returned to Jerusalem. When he returned, he tried to initiate a number of religious reforms during the last 5 years of his reign, and this is when the prophet Nahum preached. Manasseh was succeeded by his son Amon, who reigned only for 2 years before he was assassinated. His son Josiah took his place at the age of 8 years old, and at 20 years old, Josiah got rid of the idols and pagan images that his grandfather Manasseh introduced to Judah. However, by removing images of Assyrian religion from the temples, Josiah was rebelling against Assyria, and it was during this time Zephaniah's ministry took place. While Josiah was rebelling against Assyria, an international war was going on. From 625 to 615 BC, Babylon and Assyria attacked each other. Egypt witnessed all this and decided to get involved in 609 BC. Pharaoh Necho II went to Assyria's aid to fight the Babylonians, which put Josiah in a difficult position. He saw Egypt and Assyria as a strong threat to his religious reforms and desired to make Judah an independent nation. So Josiah intercepted the Egyptian army in 609 BC, which led to a battle where Josiah was fatally wounded, thus ending the last glimmer of hope for Judah. After Josiah's death, Judah quickly spiraled back into idolatry and spiritual darkness. Judah selected Josiah's son, Jehoiahaz, as king rather than Eliakim, the firstborn son of Josiah. The reason was because Jehoiahaz would continue to fight for independence while Eliakim would continue to submit to Egypt. Eventually, the Egyptians imprisoned Jehoiahaz and took him to Egypt, where he lived until he died. Pharaoh Necho installed Eliakim on the throne, where he served as his puppet and changed his name to Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim was a tyrant. Jeremiah described him as an unjust and brutal ruler. He was so evil that he was the only king of Judah who had ever executed a prophet of God. It was during the reign of Jehoiakim that Habakkuk writes, which explains why Habakkuk does not understand why God would let this type of evil to exist. Now, we don't know much about Habakkuk except that his name means to embrace. We do know that Habakkuk was a contemporary of Jeremiah, Nahum, and Zephaniah. During Habakkuk's time, Assyria faded from the scene and Babylon took over. Habakkuk mentions the rise of the Babylonians, which means that he wrote after the fall of Nineveh in 612 BC and before Jerusalem fell to Babylon in 597 BC. So we know that Habakkuk is very burdened by what he is witnessing. How could righteous Josiah die at the hands of an evil ruler? How could Jehoiakim, an evil man, reign in Josiah's place? Up to this point, all the prophets, except Jonah, never questioned God. But Habakkuk can't stand by silently. So he questioned God, not because he was like Jonah and was looking for a way to disobey him. Instead, Habakkuk questioned God because he wanted God to defend his integrity. integrity. He wanted God to explain how he can make promises to his people and yet not fulfill them. He wanted God to explain how he can reconcile his holy nature with the evil that he allows to happen. Let me go over the structure of this book. Habakkuk asked his first question to God in Habakkuk chapter 1. Why do you allow evil and injustice in Judah? God responds and says that he will judge Judah for their sin, which leads to Habakkuk's second question. How? How can you use the Babylonians to oppress Judah when they are even more evil? Then we come to Habakkuk chapter 2, where God responds and says that he will also judge the Babylonians. Then the book concludes in Habakkuk chapter 3 with Habakkuk praising God for his faithfulness in the past and confessing that he will trust God in the future. So the overall message of Habakkuk is God's answer to the problem of injustice. And the summary of God's answer is revealed. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith. The righteous ones are those who live by faith. They are the ones who live between God's promise and fulfillment and continue to trust in him. How many of us live in this in-between place? We know what God has promised for us, but we are not living in that reality yet, right? We know that God promised that we will overcome sin, but we still struggle with sin. We know that God promised that we will overcome death, but we still feel the pain of death today. We know that God promised to provide for us, but we still experience the uncertainty of tomorrow. We know that God promised justice, but we live in a world filled with injustice. Living by faith means that we firmly believe that God is with his people, even when our circumstances do not give any evidence of it. It is when we choose to live by faith instead of sight, because we know that in God's time, everything he promised will be fulfilled. The reason why we might question God, like Habakkuk, is because we have short-term vision. But life will only make sense when we start to look at it from God's perspective. We need to see that we are living in one puzzle piece amongst the millions of pieces that God is orchestrating and putting together for his glory. What we can learn from Habakkuk is that God's justice does not always work for every individual or even for every generation. But God's justice works when we look back in hindsight from his perspective. So because of Habakkuk's willingness to question God, God gave him the only answer that will give him hope on this side of eternity. The righteous will live by faith. Now, why does Habakkuk's message matter for us? When we wrestle with God over the question of evil and injustice, he will lead us deeper into him. When we don't settle for easy answers, but wrestle with God in his word, he will bring us to the place of deeper faith in him. He might not give us the answers we want, but he will give us reasons why we can trust in him more tomorrow than we do today. Thank you to today's sponsor, On Reverence. They offer free digital worship music app called Maskill. If you want to find out more, I'll leave some links below in the description box. If you missed the last video about the book of Nahum, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. And until next time, see you.